Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I am Mike Coletta.
And this week we're on Chapter 13 of the Ultimate History of Video Games, Volume 2 by Stephen L. Kent. We're kind of doing this in a little book club format, so we kind of read a chapter, we discuss, we sort of summarize a little bit here. This is all publicly facing knowledge, but you should totally go buy this book because it is a wonderful book. And there's so many more like side stories in there and like quotes that Kent has gotten from tons of people in the industry. It's totally worth buying, so...
Yeah, we're just talking about our parts that we really liked. Because I realized we also covered a lot of this in our own personal, like, Xbox and PlayStation 3 and Wii history after we got done with the first book. So
we kind of went into this stuff. Yeah. Also, this the stuff that we're covering now is like in Chapter 13 is sort of like the early days of the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, Wii generation. I believe that's Generation 7 of video games. And Microsoft just put out like a 6-part... history of Xbox thing where they go into like the beginnings of Xbox. They talk to a lot of people that did it. It's like right around this sort of covers the same sort of time period. They talk about the Red Ring of Death, and then kind of by the end it just turns into an ad for Microsoft Xbox. But that last episode really just an ad for the Xbox Series X. But leading up to it, they're very candid and like it's also worth watching. So if you're interested in this period of time in video game history, you should check that out too.
I've only watched the first one so far, but it was really cool putting faces to the names that we read all the time. And I love that. I thought that was wonderful. But you're right. It does, even in those early episodes, sometimes you're like, this is borderline advertising territory. But hey, they put their own documentary up, so whatever. That's cool.
They go into those things like, this was a mistake, and here's how we fixed it and why we're the greatest gaming company ever for fixing this. You're like, okay, well.
We are the greatest. All right, so this chapter is actually called Keeping Secrets. Ooh. And we start talking about how at the beginning of 2006, like things are looking pretty good for Microsoft and the Xbox 360. Sony's had to delay the launch of the PS3. And Bill Gates is out here at E3 saying that he estimates they'll sell 10 million units before Sony even releases the PS3.
That's so many units. Yeah. Can they even make that many units?
Who knows? Because certainly at the beginning they could not. But Sony's VP of Sales, Jack Tretton, who kind of is like a smack talker, which I like about this guy. I don't know anything else about him. But he's like... His quote was, quote, "What is our first 3 million relative to 33 million 5 years later?" End quote. So he just doesn't even care. And I mean,
he's kind of right. He's kind of right because by the end of this generation, I think the PS3 ends up outselling the 360 by the end of this generation. I don't know. We'll get there. That's spoilers, maybe.
So spoilers to real life stuff that you could look up on your own. Spoilers. But yeah, so Tretton actually also argued that the PS2 outsold the Xbox not because of launch windows, but because they just had better games. And to that extent, I think he's correct.
I mean, why can't it be both?
Yeah. I mean, I think the Xbox just really had a limited library compared to the PlayStation 2 because the PlayStation 2 is just arguably the best console of all time, if you're really thinking about it. Like, as much
it's definitely a contender.
Xbox fanboy as I am, I have to realize that the PlayStation 2 is just like what broke through video games into the mainstream, you could even say. Mm-hmm. So... we talked about that last time. Okay, so Microsoft did have some challenges in 2006, even though they were alone on the market. And the first challenge that Kent talks about in the book is that the PlayStation 2 dropped its price tag to $129, which is so cheap for a console. Mm-hmm. And then they had PlayStation 2 classic games, those ones that had like the red label at the top. Those were $19 a pop. And I remember buying those. What a great deal. It's a great deal. And so they have an amazing library of great games. And even though Microsoft has this next-gen hardware, it doesn't matter because they don't have a lot of games, which is hard, and they're still working on it.
And as we all know, gotta have games.
Gotta have games. If Tyler and I have said it once, we've said it 1,000 times, you need to have games. So one of my favorite moments from this chapter is that the media, there's like a gotcha moment from the media on Peter Moore. Did you read this part? Do you remember this part?
Yeah.
It's actually Dan Su. It's HSU. I think you just say Sue. I think that's how you say it. Hopefully I'm saying it right. Was at Electronic Gaming Monthly, and he was interviewing Peter Moore about what games he liked. Pick one of these two. So the first one was Splinter Cell or Sneakers, and Peter Moore picked Splinter Cell. And then it was Soul Calibur 2 or Kabuki Warriors. And Peter Moore picked Soul Calibur 2. And the last was Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball or Barbie Horse Adventures. And then Peter Moore picked Extreme Beach Volleyball. This whole thing, though, was kind of a gotcha setup because Sue then hit him with this quote. So here's what we're getting at. You picked 3 Xbox games that aren't backwards compatible on the Xbox 360, and the other ones, Sneakers, Kabuki, and Barbie, are. End quote.
Oh, got him.
Yeah, he got him so good. And it's just like one of those other things where it's like, there's this communication thing going on at Microsoft, and we're going to talk about it soon because we're going to talk about the Red Ring of Death this episode also, where they just keep putting their foot in their mouth. There's no other way to say it. They just keep doing weird things for the sake of the company. And Bill Gates' 10 million unit prediction was overly optimistic. If you include the 5.8 million consoles sold in 2006 with the 2005 numbers they had for like the holidays, the last 3 months of the year, they're around 7 million total by January 2007. So they didn't really hit 10 million.
A little short. And a lot of this is actually Sony's strategy working. So if you remember last episode, we talked about how Sony really kind of tried to seed doubt in consumers' minds by saying the PS3 would be superior to the 360 in hardware. And in fact, that made a lot of people wait. And then on top of that, you have these early hardware problems with the Xbox 360 as they come out. And so those people that are waiting feel like they really made the right decision, and they're just going to keep playing their PS2 games. So that was another thing that happened. And this last point before we get to the big Red Ring of Death here is 360 apparently had a lot more shooters than other consoles did, to the point where a lot of people at the time may have looked at it as like a shooter console. And if you look at their top 360 games in 2006, their top 5, 3 of the top 5 were shooters: Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, Call of Duty 3, and Gears of War. And I never put that together, but they're totally right. It was totally about first-person shooters the first year. The 360 was all about first-person shooters and third-person shooters.
Yeah, and just shooters in general. And so that was a big reason why, like, if you were looking for RPGs, like, you were better off with a PlayStation or a Nintendo, for sure. So, hey, they had that going. But now we get to, by far, the biggest problem in the entire mess of the early Xbox 360 launch, and that is the infamous Red Ring of Death. Yeah, that was a really good evil laugh, Tyler. That was really good.
Yeah, thank you.
I remember my brother actually put his the motherboard for his 360, he put it in the oven to fix it. Did you ever hear about friends doing this or people doing this?
Yes, so the PlayStation 3 had a similar issue. Like, I think it was for similar reasons. Like, there's lots of speculation on what caused the Red Ring of Death. The PlayStation 3 also had an abnormally high failure rate. Not quite as high as 360, but I did the same thing with my PS3 motherboard. I put it in the oven and I heated it up to a certain temperature and then turned the oven off and took it out of the oven, and it fixed it. It worked for another probably 6 months.
And that worked for my brother too, but his only worked for like a couple weeks and then it died.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I think the whole point of putting it in the oven was like you remelt the solder and kind of like reset it, right? Is that what you're supposed to do?
It doesn't fix the problem. It just sort of like solves it temporarily. Like, it's still going to break again because they're all ticking time bombs, every single one of them.
Yeah, and if you want to fix that, you got to learn to solder, which, hey, for some people, maybe that's how they learn to solder. So that's cool. Mm-hmm. They learned some electronics. But this was a huge problem for Microsoft, despite what Peter Moore and Robbie Bach said. And there's a quote on pages 304 and 305. It kind of crosses over. And it's from journalist Dean Takahashi. And it pretty much sums up this whole problem on the manufacturing side of things. So I'm going to read this here. Here we go. Ready? Quote, "An engineer that I interviewed in 2005 raised his hand and said, 'We have to stop the line.' He was looking at what was coming off the line and was still functional. It was 32 machines out of 100. That's a tremendously bad yield. Microsoft was able to absorb that kind of loss just to get those initial machines out. But anybody who understands manufacturing knows that many of those 32 machines that came off the line functional were going to fail in the field." End quote. 32 out of 100 machines worked in manufacturing. That is so bad.
And all of those were eventually going to fail. Those are just the ones that made it through the test at the factory, right?
Yeah, that was like probably the most staggering quote to me from this whole chapter. I was like, that is such a high failure rate. Mm-hmm. You know? So Microsoft, in short, had to keep going, though, because if you remember in our previous episodes, and if you read the book, their big goal was they had to beat Sony. We have to be first. That was their whole mindset. So while they're manufacturing these consoles with such a high fail rate, they were trying to find a solution behind the scenes, but they couldn't stop. they just had to keep pushing to try to get them out. And so publicly, they just deny. Like anytime it was brought up, they're like, there's lots of people that enjoy the Xbox. I think they showed that quote like 4 or 5 times in the book. People are really enjoying the Xbox. Everything's fine. And it's like, no, but just like that meme with the cartoon character sitting in the burning classroom. And he's like, everything's fine. It's like that at Microsoft.
Yeah. I feel for those people in the like PR roles that actually don't know what's happening, right? And like the engineers are still trying to figure out what's going on. And so the PR people, like, maybe they think that something weird is happening, but when they have to just say what they have to say, because like that person doesn't know what's going on, right? They can't be like, yeah, we're failing pretty hard here. Like they don't know, and the engineers don't know, and it's like they have to figure out what the problem is before you can admit that there is a problem. You kind of have to, you want to have the solution in place. So you can say, yes, we know there's a problem. The solution is this. Send us your Xboxes. Is basically what's going to end up happening, but. I think I just feel bad for those PR people that people are like, well, tell us what's happening. They're like, we don't know either, but we can't say that.
Yeah, I think the really unfortunate thing is you look at this and they're like, if they could have waited. They didn't know that then.
Yeah.
They could have taken 6 months to like, because I think they say in the book that it's like 90 days is typically the turnaround to try to find out what was wrong with it. Even though we'll talk about this in a second, there was a lot of things wrong with the Xbox 360, which is why it red ringed. But they could have probably taken a year almost. Because PlayStation 3 didn't come out until 2007, right? So they had realistically, they could have waited a whole year and released holiday 2006 instead of holiday 2005.
That's when the PS3 came out was holiday 2006.
Oh, it was? For some reason I thought it was in 2007. Okay. So I had it all wrong. But yeah, so it's like regardless, they had that mindset going that they had to be first, and that's really what did this. And what really made it such a mess. And it's always, I will remember this for the rest of my life because it was such a funny time of all of us being like, is our Xbox going to red ring? I was so close a couple times too, where I like didn't plug the hard drive in all the way and I thought it red ringed. And it was like, nope, I just didn't plug the hard drive in all the way.
Basically, everybody who owned a 360 in this time period has some sort of story about the red ring of death. I had one. I had to send my console in.
Did they fix it? And how long did it take? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but I was in college and I probably went a week without my 360, which felt pretty bad because I can't remember if at one point they were sending coffins to people. That's what everybody started calling them, coffins. They'd send you an empty box and you put your 360 in it and send it off. And then they would send you like a refurbished 360. I think you could do it if you had a credit card that you would let them put a charge on. You could get sent a 360 first and then send the old one back in the box of the new one. But they had to put a hold on your credit card and make sure you're not stealing 360s. I want to say it took a week. That was not great.
I don't want to support crime on this show, but I had a couple friends that did the old Walmart bamboozle where you buy a console at Walmart and you put your broken one in the box and keep the good one and then return it to Walmart.
Oh,
that was a thing in college.
They're going to end up returning it back to Microsoft anyway and getting their money back, so it doesn't matter that much either way.
Yeah, that was the old college bamboozle that a couple of our friends did. That will not be named because who knows the statute of limitations on that.
I think that's a victimless crime right there. Walmart's going to get their money back by sending it to Microsoft. Microsoft was going to fix it anyway for this person. They just didn't have to wait for it. You know who can stand to wait a week for their Xbox? Walmart. You know who can't? A kid in college.
That's right.
I support this.
I love Fallout 3, and that's what I played on my Xbox 360. That was the first game I got on it, and I loved it. So there you go. Okay. Yeah. Also, if you don't know the way it works, the Xbox 360 has 4 lights surrounding the power button, and if they're all lit up, they form a ring. In this case, but they can also be green instead of red. And 1 or 2 flashing red lights, even 3 flashing red lights is not a big deal. It's usually something you could just plug in and fix, or like it's temporarily overheated and you just need to wait a second. But if it fully wraps around and you get 4 red lights in a full red ring, your Xbox is essentially bricked at that point, and you have to send it in a coffin, like Tyler mentioned, for maintenance. There is a very uncomfortable printed interview on pages 307 and 308 of the book that I'm not going to read, but it's clear the journalist asking the questions is getting corporate speak, and it's very uncomfortable. So I'll just sum it up. It's like, can I have the return rate? The return rate is normal, is what the guy from Microsoft says. Well, then what's the return rate? And then he goes, we just don't release that information. It's just like that and over again. You're like, oh, okay. Like, this is what's going on. So the reality is, the red ring of death, there's multiple factors that caused this problem. And they included, and are not limited to less than specified memory from chip makers, the GPU just running hot in general, and that would cause the motherboard to warp in some cases, bad solder joints, and there were also new environmental standards in Europe that required lead-free solder, and a lot of people thought that the lead-free solder that was the main problem.
I think that was kind of what the general consensus was. I guess Microsoft probably never confirmed or denied that, but I think that was the general consensus because the PS3 also had similar issues, not quite to the same extent the Xbox did, but I think they also had to use lead-free solder and they had issues.
The common denominator was the lead-free solder.
Yeah, and the biggest problem was that solder didn't do well with being powered on and off, so because it would heat up and then it would cool down, and like the expanding and contracting of it would sort of cause those joints to crack, and then they wouldn't connect very well, which is why you could stick it in your oven, melt all the solder again, and like sort of fill those gaps that the cracks were in, and get your thing to work for a little bit while longer. Of course, that doesn't actually solve the problem, and you'll eventually have the trouble again anyway.
I really hope there was college students that like baked their motherboard to make it work again, and then instead of turning the oven off, just put a frozen pizza in right afterward, you know?
Oh, God. Yeah, I want that lead-free solder in my
Just the motherboard to pizza, you know? We've all done it.
Oh, oh man.
You know what happened, though. It had to have happened.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. So that's what's going on with Microsoft. That's their secrets, according to the chapter. But what's Nintendo doing during all this? Well, they're about to reveal the controller for their new console, codenamed Revolution. Nintendo chairman Satoru Iwata hinted at it for so long, but then finally revealed what would become the Wiimote at the Tokyo Game Show on September 15th, the exact same night Microsoft announced their plans to launch the 360.
Wow.
And people didn't know what to think at first, I guess is a good way to put it. Some were confused. Others saw it as like stupid. Some people thought it was a big move. Like Robbie Bach from Microsoft was like, this is a big move. And I have a quote from him later on. But the Wiimote video is your classic Nintendo fare. Everyone's happy. You got kids playing with their grandparents. You got college friends playing together. Every group of people, all ages, family, friends, they're playing the Nintendo Wii games with the Wiimote, and it's fun. You know, and that's the point of this, is they're bringing people together. And the Wiimote also, while dismissed by some as just like a motion tracker, actually had some cool new tech behind it. Like it had that track, like it could track you on 3 axes, but it also tracked your TV. It had that bar that went under your TV, so you could use it as like a pointer. And I always thought that was super fun to just like click menu items.
Cool.
It felt cool.
Yeah, that worked really well, like better than you would have expected it to, I think.
Yeah, and you could use, I mean, when you shot like arrows and used it as like a thing in a game, it felt good too. It was really cool. So I love the Wiimote. I think this was also like college nostalgia for me, because we got Wiis my freshman year of college, and we were all playing them in the dorm. Like everyone was playing it, you know, it was super fun. Wii bowling nights, a lot cheaper than real bowling.
Yep. Peter
Moore was kind of funny. He's one of the naysayers. He was like, we made this at Microsoft in 1998. It's not a big deal, you know, because they had like a motion tracker device. But Robbie Bach's exact quote from the book was, quote, okay, that is going to be a problem, end quote.
Yeah.
I'm going to say he's right. It's like, again, Nintendo's moving the bar. It's not going to be about tech in the modern sense of like how many like floating points you can have. It's about changing how games are played. And I think in that sense, we're going to see why the Wii is so successful in that way.
Gotta have games. And Peter Moore didn't have games when they did it in 1998, when Microsoft did it before, but Nintendo got games. They always got games.
Nintendo's got games.
Yeah. So Sony is also in this, of course, because we're gearing up towards, we're heading into E3 2006. So Sony's got a lot of pressure here to show off the PlayStation 3, because people know that this thing is coming out in November. They don't know the exact day yet, I don't think, but they know it's coming out this year. And so Sony's like, gotta show some stuff here. And they have a little bit of a problem, because the previous year at E3 2005, they did show a bunch of PS3 stuff. And this is like the infamous one where they kind of showed off a bunch of specs that seemed a little bit unbelievable. The footage of the games they were showing was a bit unbelievable. And we would come to learn later that some of that footage had been not exactly truthful. To their credit, though, Sony's specs were true. Some of the benchmarks of the cell architecture were a little bit misleading. Like, it was true that developers would be able to get great performance out of the cell architecture, but it required a lot of knowledge and effort to do so, which is a lot like Sony's previous systems. What didn't come to fruition here. The 2 HDMI ports and 3 Ethernet ports, which we talked about last time. Those didn't really materialize. 1 HDMI port, 1 Ethernet port, because nobody wanted that stuff.
Yeah, why
anyway.
would you have more than that? Unless you're trying to like link systems, right? Maybe?
Yeah, that seems like a silly way to, like, there's better ways to do all of that. Like, that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to just sell a separate Ethernet hub. That's, for system linking, but that wasn't a big thing on PS3 anyway. So
yeah, the extra HDMI ports, no purpose whatsoever. Like,
yeah, like, are we going to be playing on 2 monitors? Is there...
Yeah.
Like, there's just not really a good use case there.
I even still get confused with my Xbox One with HDMI in, HDMI out. Like, I think I'm fine and I plug it in the wrong one because I'm not looking and I'm just like, why is it not? Oh, yeah, because this thing was supposed to go through your cable box. I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, that was a
whole thing.
That was a whole thing. Yeah, they talk about that in that Microsoft documentary where they talk about how they goofed on that, which I appreciated.
Yeah, thank you for admitting your goofage because it's so silly. My friend did it and he's like, it's all right. Like, he's like, there's really no point to it. I have a remote right here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that because I think they were sort of onto something, maybe a little bit ahead of their time, and maybe they didn't quite do it right, but I think they were onto something with the overall vision there, that this never really materialized. But anyway, back in E3 2006, the developers are a lot of the early developers of the PlayStation 3 are kind of talking a bit about how hard it was to develop for the PlayStation 3 because they'd been working on it by this point. They'd had actual hardware. And it was really, really difficult to get that performance out of the PS3's hardware. And the fact was that devs were able to get better performance out of the Xbox 360 for less work, which was something that a lot of developers were sort of like, that was the talk of the town, right? Nobody presented that, but like that was sort of the rumbling. And by E3 2006, those great demos that Sony had shown in 2005 were starting to be real, actual playable games on the show floor, which is great. But they did not look or play as good as the videos had shown the previous year, which is a big yikes.
Ruh-roh.
That's a disappointment. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mark Cerny, who's one of the people who would later become the main designer of the Vita, the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 5, he talks about the PS3 as if it's this like puzzle box, like an interesting challenge. He's like, I love the puzzle of figuring the system out and getting as much performance out of it as possible. But unfortunately, game developers aren't really here to solve puzzles. They're here to make games. And it was straight up harder and more time consuming to make games on the PS3. So that was a bummer for Sony.
Yeah, that you don't want. I think we never really talk about it that much, but the ease of development on consoles is huge, I think, for third-party developers, which is, the whole point of the Xbox.
Yes.
The DirectX thing was like, that was why we're doing this. But while it's a factor, we've seen the PS2 and PS3 success, so I guess it's not too much of a factor. And they talk about how one of the games in this chapter, I forget which one it was, they talk about how it came out 3 years after the launch, and because the developers knew what they were doing, they got a really good look. I think it was Killzone 2, actually. Looked really good because 2 years later, or 3 years later, they knew how to develop for the system. So
yeah. Yes, that is true. So yeah, E3 in 2006 was a bit of a letdown in general for Sony. They actually spent 15 whole minutes showing off Gran Turismo, which wasn't particularly impressive. Like, it looked pretty good. It was fine. Like, the graphics were great. And so they spent 15 minutes showing that off. And for context, Kent notes earlier that Nintendo's Twilight Princess and Microsoft's Gears of War demos were only 8 minutes in their respective presentations. And those were like big, groundbreaking games, right? And they only showed for half as much time as they showed this like sort of boring Gran Turismo thing. So that one kind of dragged on for a little while. They did get to brag that the PlayStation Network was going to be free, which was definitely shots fired at Xbox Live. And honestly, we'll get to this in a little bit, but that price should probably be factored in a little bit to the price of the PS3, because Xbox Live has a subscription fee that's like sort of not included in the price of the console, right? They got to show off their 6-axis controller, which is a kind of a quick attempt to swipe motion controls from Nintendo. It was fine. It worked okay. But the 6-axis controller gave gamers motion controls at the cost of force feedback. So those first 6-axis controllers don't have any sort of like rumble inside the controller. And Sony claimed that that was because, we can't fit all these motion control things in and the rumble motors. We just can't do it. It's impossible, right? I'm not sure that trade-off was great. And also the DualShock 3, which came out a couple of years later, would have all of those features in the same controller. Conveniently, after Sony figured out their lawsuit issue with the company that owned the patent for that force feedback stuff, which Microsoft just paid. They just paid to license it, so they didn't have any problems getting Rumble in their controllers. I thought that was funny that they like tried to play it off as this like tech thing when it's like, I don't know. I don't think it's really a tech thing.
Yeah, it's a lawsuit.
Yeah. It's you guys. I get it. It's fine. You're still fighting over this, but that's not why. So the next thing that Sony did at the end of the presentation, their super long and boring presentation, was reveal the launch date, November 11th in Japan, November 17th in North America, and the price. So the price of the PlayStation 3 was $499 for the base configuration with a 220GB hard drive, 2 USB ports, no Wi-Fi, and it came with a wireless controller. And also $599 for a 60GB version with 4 USB ports, built-in Wi-Fi, and some card readers on the front for like, I don't know, looking at pictures off of memory cards. I don't know if anybody ever put a card, an SD card or a compact flash card or a smart media card or a memory stick into their PlayStation 3, but it could do all of those. I think it did smart media. Maybe it didn't do smart media. I don't know anybody who used it for that, but that was a thing. But the thing there is that is way above the $399 price of the Xbox 360's main bundle. So you could get a version of the 360 that was $299. It wasn't really worth getting, but it existed. And the $399 version came with a 20GB hard drive, did not have Wi-Fi, but it did come with a wireless controller. And so Sony kind of shot themselves in the foot there. And it was at that point that Microsoft knew that they were going to be okay. And I think it's funny that this is like Steve Race's moment at E3 in 1995 when he walked up on stage and said $299, and that's basically how the PlayStation won that generation of consoles. Sony sealed their fate by announcing their price at an E3, but just not the way that they'd hoped this year. It was much more expensive. It was a year late, and it was more expensive, and it wasn't going to have games at the start. This is where the has no games meme is born. PS3 has no games.
That's right. And I actually did not buy a PS3 was just out of the question for me because of that price point. I remember like looking at it and being like, oh, I can't afford $600. I'm a college kid. I can't afford this. Just no way.
Yeah.
I even had to wait a couple years to get my 360 because I was a college kid, so it's like PlayStation. People had PlayStations. You're like, geez, are you just made of money? What are you doing?
Yeah. Gosh, these people just raining money. Or they spent all their money on their PS5, PS3, PS5.
But Tyler, what you been playing?
Well, this week I really haven't been playing much. A little bit of Destiny, but I've been dealing with some life stuff and getting ready to drive back up to Washington from California, which is a long drive. Takes a little bit of preparation. Had to get my car fixed. Whole bunch of stuff. It's been a whole thing, but getting ready to leave pretty soon. So that's mostly what I've been doing. I've been playing Car Ride Preparation Simulator 2021.
Oh, Auto Mechanic Simulator. Yeah.
Yeah, Auto Mechanic Simulator as well. So, yeah. What about you? How much have you been playing? What have you been playing?
Well, I didn't play a lot the last 2 days, but I did play quite a bit of 2 games. Halo Infinite's campaign.
I have played a bit of Halo Infinite. That's a good point. I put 5 or 6 hours into that already.
Me too. 5 or 6 hours about where I'm at. I love it. I'm having it's working for me. I didn't think that would work, that open format. But I totally get it. And I think it works.
Me too.
I'm like, oh, this works with Halo. They're right. Who knew the professional game designers would be right? Who knew? So I've been playing that. And also on sale, they put the new Jurassic World Evolution 2. So I got that. And the dinosaurs sit down and it's hilarious. So there's that. And I was playing that a little bit too. But then I'm going to be gone for the holidays soon too. And I am going to be playing so much Zelda while I'm gone to try to finish that out. That's my plan. That's my I have a plan of attack for all the video games I want to play this next 2 weeks. And the flight is my plan for Zelda,
Nice.
And then while I'm at home, I'm playing Halo and Destiny 2 and then Jurassic World Evolution 2.
I always get so excited for plane rides. And I'm like, I'm going to be able to play games because I'll have nothing else to do. There's no internet. I'll just sit here and I'll play my Switch or I'll play whatever, some sort of handheld thing that I have at the time. And I never do it. I always just end up sitting there and staring at the seat in front of me. I can't play games on a plane, even though I know that that's a great place to do that. I just can't do it.
The hardest part is just starting. That's what I
think you're right.
That's what I realized because I would do the same thing. I would listen to podcasts and just zone out. And then I'm like, oh no. If I make a point to say, sit in my seat, I get all settled, I get the Switch out and I start it because you can have it on now in airplane mode. When the plane launches, you can just keep playing. You can play it the entire time you're on the plane. If you do that, you're made. You're in the zone now. And it's because I agree. I do the same thing, but I've gotten a lot better about just turning it on, knowing like this is what I'm doing on this plane. And it's great.
Yeah. I get like worried that like somebody's going to see me and judge me. I don't know why. That's silly. I can look at myself and realize that that's silly to think that right now. But when I'm on the plane, it's so hard for me to do.
You know, there's people doing way worse things on planes, like taking their shoes off. Okay.
Or we're putting their hair down behind the seat that they're sitting in so that it covers up the seat in front of them.
Or just loud talking in general. Just why are you so loud talking?
Or crying babies, which that's not anybody's fault.
Give those kids a Switch. That's what I say.
That's right. Yeah. That's not anybody's fault. I'm not really complaining about that.
Get that kid an iPad. No, I agree though. You have this stigma to it, but then I see like people way older than me playing like Switches on planes, you know?
Yeah.
So I think you should just really try to go for it, you know, and get in the zone. But you're driving this time, right? So
I am driving. I'm taking a long drive up to Washington. So hopefully I'm not playing any games on the way. That would be a bad idea.
That's very dangerous. Do not do that.
I'll make the dog drive. Luna can drive and I'll play some games.
Oh, Luna's coming with you?
Yeah. That's why I'm driving, so I can bring Luna
That's going to be a fun trip for that dog. Oh, man.
Yeah.
So
she is really bad in cars. She gets very nervous.
Oh, okay. Well, I get that too.
So we'll see.
Get that dog an iPad. Okay. Well, we got a couple of emails here we're going to read. We're going to read 3 emails right now. And then I'm going to talk about what we're doing next week. Remind me to say that, Tyler. Okay. So the first email is from Kev from Wyoming. And it's thanks and reminiscing is the subject line. Hi, Mike and Tyler. I want to express my appreciation for the wonderful podcast you both create and share with us. I have been listening for several months and always find that tuning in helps me feel connected to my fellow gamers in a unique way. It is fun to hear either or both of you reminisce about your childhood experiences with video games, and I always smile to these stories in part because you're both younger than I am, and it's amusing to learn how far back your stories go. This is one of the only times in my life when I feel cool about being older and remembering more than someone else. That is true. I actually do that with like high school students. At school, they're like, "What's a Super Nintendo?" And I'm like, "Oh, you idiot,
you dummy,
you big dummy." No, I'm just kidding. I don't say that. In my mind, I'm thinking that though. But that's true. It is fun. It's a fun part about being older is you remember cool stuff because we're wiser. You know, for example, Kev from Wyoming, infinitely wiser than the both of us.
That's right.
Fair to say. Okay, the email goes on to say, episode 168, The Fall of Sega, is when you talked about remembering when it was a choice to connect to the internet with a PC. That was around my high school years, and I fondly remember the screeching sound of my modem dialing in and connecting to my ISP. One of my favorite memories of gaming were the times I'd actually carry my computer and monitor 3 doors down to my friend's house so we could play Red Alert over a direct cable parallel port connection. We're talking a 266 megahertz AMD K6 chip and, of course, a heavy CRT monitor. Oh, the CRT. We would play those duels for hours into the night. Building up a base with a good defense and creating an offensive strike force to attack my friend was so fun. And with the hardline connection, we didn't tie up the phone line and anger our sisters. At some point, we would run out of cheap pizza and start to fade, though. I would wait until the next day to lug that computer back home. It's great that you both share your nostalgia for gaming with your audience. I'm sure many of us get to reminiscing and smiling while we regularly listening. Thank you both. Keep up the top-notch efforts of the podcast. Kev from Wyoming. P.S. I love the idea of an episode about video game documentaries that you've mentioned. That's it's on the list. That's a good one. That's a real good one.
Yeah.
I think we're just going to try to get through this book, and then we have so many new ideas to go for. New books, too. People recommended some books to us also, so we can just go into another book since people like that, or we can talk about reviewing a video game documentary for an episode. That would be fun. But that's some good nostalgia right there. A direct cable parallel port connection. You know?
Oh man, that's a little bit before my time, but I have definitely fond LAN party stories to tell, lugging CRTs around and big TVs, and oh man, good times.
That's right. All right, do you want to read Shane's email? It's the next one there. Shane has multiple questions, and he said we could spread them out throughout the week. So I was thinking we could just star this email and do the first question today. Are you cool with that?
Okay, let's do that. All right. So Shane's email here. Hey, friends. I just finished the most recent episode of your show. Bravo, as always, because my workday is somehow already finished. I thought I'd ask you a few questions that popped into my brain. Feel free to break these up over multiple episodes, as the answers could potentially run long and have no interest in clogging up the airtime when others might have emails.
It's very thoughtful. Very thoughtful of you, Shane.
First question here. If you could have a meal with any video game character, either by pulling them into our world or going into theirs, who would the meal be with and what would you eat? If you care to explain why you made those choices, feel free to do so, though I cannot possibly require such a thing.
My thought would be, if I go into that video game character's world, can I eat what they eat? Because how fun would it be to be Kirby and you just eat anything? You know?
Oh yeah, just eating.
That was my first thought. Yeah,
and...
just being a pure monster, a horrible terror monster, eating people and taking their likeness. Just doing that.
For me, I think I'm gonna say Link and Breath of the Wild. First of all, Link's not gonna say a whole lot, so this isn't gonna be like a boring dinner where you have to make small talk. I'm really bad at talking to people. So he's not going to say anything. But also, Breath of the Wild Link is a really good cook. There's some of that stuff looks so good that he makes. I would just eat whatever he cooked up for me.
That's a good point. You know what? I want to change my answer to Breath of the Wild Link. That's a good point. And the fun part is gathering the ingredients. It's about the ingredients you gather along the way.
That's right. Yeah, you have to help him gather the ingredients. That's it. That's why.
I'm trying to think of other characters I would want to eat with, like fictional video game characters. I mean, you can't say Master Chief because he never takes off his helmet.
Right. He doesn't eat. I think
Doesn't Marcus Phoenix live on like a farm?
In Gears of War 4, yeah.
I'd eat a farm-to-table meal with Marcus Phoenix. Yeah. That sounds nice. Same. He'd probably run a nice little bed and breakfast thing going on there. You know what I mean? If it wasn't overrun with aliens from the underground,
Yeah, well, you can help him kill the aliens, and then afterwards he'll feed you dinner.
That'd be good, That's a good question, though. So we'll do the next question next episode. Actually, there's two more, so we'll spread them out. But I think this is good.
Okay.
And it's important that Shane ends the email with Spidey fannies. That's also important too. But that's some great questions. So I will star this email, and then we'll read it again and do the other questions next time. Do you want me to read John from Wisconsin's email?
Sure.
It says, warning. Lengthy email ahead. It's a fantastic show is the subject line. Finally caught up after a couple of months of listening to y'all's every day on my commute to and from work. I wanted to say thank you both, Tyler and Mike, for this wonderful podcast. Keep up the great work. I can't wait for more episodes on obscure and forgotten game consoles. Now time for a couple of hot takes. Here we go. All right. Everyone, put your t-shirts on because these takes are hot. Here we go. First, Spider-Man on the PS1 and Dreamcast, not the 64, we don't need to mention that version, is the best Spider game of all time. Thanks for agreeing with me. Wow, I love Spider-Man 64.
Dang. I love the PS1 and Dreamcast version of that Spider-Man game. It is a very good game.
But then again, maybe this might be the game that I like that people find bad. The Spider-Man 64. I just remember playing it as a kid and loving it, but I couldn't beat it without turning the cheats on. It was so hard. Because there's like a it's a what's it called? Not Miss Marvel. It's like Mr. Universe. It's another one of those like super crazy cosmic superheroes, and you get a suit for Spider-Man that's like that.
Galactus or something.
Yeah, and it's like it makes you invincible. And I had to beat the game on that because I couldn't. At a certain point, you fight Carnage in this battle, and you just couldn't beat him. It was so hard. But yeah, I like the 64 version, so that's a very hot take to me. John from Wisconsin. Hurts my feelings, but you know what? I like that you have a hot take. Here goes the second one. You ready?
Yeah.
The PS Vita is the greatest handheld of all time. Hear me out before you start agreeing right away. Okay, I love the endings of these. Okay, and he has points too. He has points about why. Okay. The first version had an impressive OLED screen for the time.
Yeah, it's still impressive today. Still looks great.
Do you say OLED or OLED?
I think you can say it either way. I don't think there's a proper way.
All right. I always said OLED, and I changed my mind in the middle of it. So, okay, next point. PSP and PS1 games run great on it. Yes, you have to buy them again if you already own the physical copies. It may have a lot of games, but it may not have a lot of games, but a good chunk of games are on our top tier. Examples: Persona 4 Golden, Soul Sacrifice, Gravity Rush, Dragon's Crown, Child of Light, Tearaway, and loads of indie games. If you have a PS4 and a Vita, you can stream the PS4 games to the Vita. I have tried this with the new Spider-Man game, Call of Duty Cold War multiplayer. I was shocked this one worked, and Far Cry 4. It works near perfect with very minor latency. I could go on for hours why the Vita is fantastic, but thanks again for the great podcast, John from Wisconsin.
I think in terms of like, I don't know, Desert Island isn't the right way to describe this, but like in terms of what like the most ultimate handheld possible right now. I think the PS Vita's got to be it, because if you hack it, you can get emulators for, everything up through PS1. Probably Dreamcast might be okay on it. I don't actually know. And then there's also all those great PS Vita games, all the great PSP games. Yeah, I think that's a solid contender for best handheld of all time. Definitely.
I don't have enough experience with the PlayStation handhelds to really have an opinion on it, but John makes a very convincing argument. So I'm going to say my only thing is those games are great, but how do they compare with like Nintendo DS games, I guess, or 3DS games or whatever? What would this be going? Would this be going against the 3DS or 2DS or just the Nintendo
3DS? Yeah, this would be up against the 3DS.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a hot take, though. I like it.
In terms of games for the console, right? If we're comparing PS Vita games versus 3DS games, I think there's just more good stuff for the 3DS, even though there are a lot of very good PS Vita games like Persona 4. All these games that were mentioned here are good games, but I think 3DS has it beat. But in terms of like back catalog, especially if you're allowed to hack the device.
That is true, because you can't really hack a Nintendo 3DS, right?
You can. You definitely can. There's not as much good for it, I think, than the PS Vita. Yeah.
All right. Well, those are some two good hot takes from John in Wisconsin. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I like the N64 Spider-Man, but I will love that until the end of time. Just it's a game in my heart,
Yeah.
We had a question about that, like what games do we love even though they're bad? And I think I should have said this one because I forgot how much I like this one.
So something that I have been meaning to say, we had a question at one point about games that you played that never got a sequel that you wished more people had played so they could have got a sequel that was really good. And the game that keeps popping up for me now that I need to go back and play again because I loved it so much is Recore for the Xbox One. I love that game. It came out, it was pretty buggy when it first came out. I think it didn't get great reviews because of that, but they did like a definitive edition of it maybe a year later. And so they ironed out all the bugs. If you like Jak and Daxter style platformers, especially with the weapons and stuff and the desert aesthetic that the third Jak game has, Recore is your game. That game's awesome. And I just wanted to plug it again.
You know what's funny is I remember you hyping this game to me and I never played it. And I think it's on Game Pass now.
Oh, it's definitely on Game Pass. It's really good. It's better than it should be for how little hype it got because I freaking love that game.
All right. Well, I might go check out Recore. Put that on my Trello board of things to try.
Yeah.
This is great. Okay. Well, the plan for next week, so everyone knows, is we're going to do something a little different. It's a surprise. I'm not going to tell you what it is. But you will be getting an episode next week while Tyler and I are away. And I am just going to leave it at that. But
all right.
Before we go, I just want to say we have a Discord if you want to join that. You can send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com and ask for a link, or just send us an email if you want to send us an email. We like those too. And I'll send you a link back, or you can go to my Twitter at mecoletta, MECOLETTA, and click on the pinned tweet at the top of my profile. And that is a link that never expires. And Tyler's on Twitter too, at Sneaker Elf. And with that, I think we're done for today. Tyler, right. Do you want to say bye to the listener? Any way you want to. I don't want to put pressure on you. Any way you want to say bye to the listener.
Goodbye.
This has been a Podaholics Comedy Network presentation. Podaholics.com